You're not waiting for results. You're avoiding the moment when you'll have to face them. In this audiobook, you won't find magic formulas, but you will find truths that cut like blades. If anything you hear here doesn't make you uncomfortable, then it wasn't meant for you. This is for those who are tired of procrastinating, for those who no longer want cheap motivation but real friction with life. Here we speak seriously. Because when things start to actually work, what scares you isn't the effort. It's realizing you could have started much earlier. Chapter 1. Everything you're postponing has already started to cost you. There's a very comfortable lie we tell ourselves when we don't want to face the discomfort of moving forward. There's still time. We whisper it softly, hoping it sounds enough to calm us, to justify that inaction we've been piling up for days, weeks, or even years. But while we say that, something shifts on the other side. Something begins to collect the price of our delay. Because every single thing you postpone, every decision you avoid, every step you put off, is already generating consequences. You don't need to notice it. It doesn't need to hurt yet. The cost doesn't always arrive in the form of a tragedy or a visible loss. Sometimes it's more subtle. Sometimes what gets worn down is your character, your confidence, your energy to face what comes next. It's that invisible weight you feel when you wake up, as if something is draining your strength even before you start the day. It's not physical fatigue. It's that dull disappointment you feel in yourself, knowing deep down you're not doing what you should be doing. And it's not about filling your schedule with tasks, nor about entering a state of uncontrolled productivity. It's about recognizing that every time you decide not to act, you give time the chance to charge you something. The opportunity you let slip away, the skill you didn't develop, the relationship you didn't strengthen, the version of yourself you didn't build when you had the clarity and energy to do it. What you postpone doesn't stay still. It doesn't wait patiently. It doesn't freeze in the air until you decide to pick it back up. It transforms. It gets complicated. It drifts away. And when you want to return, it's no longer the same path, and you're no longer the same person. You've lost more than just time. You've lost alignment. You've lost precision. Because what today could have been solved with courage and focus, tomorrow might require resistance and wear. Procrastination isn't a rest. It isn't a strategic pause. It's a silent pact with resignation. It's a tacit agreement you make with yourself every time you know what you have to do. And yet, you choose to look the other way. And that decision, though it seems harmless, is what gradually weakens your foundation. Not all at once, not with a bang, but with that slow drip that erodes your ability to respond to life with resolve. The problem isn't that you procrastinate. The problem is that you don't acknowledge the cost. You deny it. You gloss it over. You disguise it with phrases like, "Now isn't the right time," "when I'm more prepared," "when I have more clarity." But clarity doesn't come from waiting. It comes from movement, from trying, from error and correction. All waiting does is produce a state of paralysis that, over time, turns into resignation. And that's when you start to feel disconnected. You're not sure why. Everything seems in order. Nothing bad happens, but nothing good either. You become a spectator. You see others moving forward, risking themselves, falling and getting up again, while you keep analyzing, planning, waiting for the perfect moment which, deep down, you know doesn't exist. And each day that passes, the fear doesn't decrease. On the contrary, it grows. Because the distance between where you are and where you should be starts to weigh on you, to distress you, to turn your life into a kind of indefinite waiting. That's when the price becomes evident. Not because something catastrophic happens, but because you start living a smaller life than you could have. A life full of excuses and lacking truth. Because truth doesn't always embrace you. Sometimes it shakes you, pushes you, exposes you. But it also frees you. It reminds you that you're in charge, that no matter what you did or didn't do before, today you have the possibility and the responsibility to start over. And not from the illusion that everything will be easy, but from the decision that you won't keep paying with your time for what you could resolve with your courage. What's hard for you isn't acting. What's hard is looking in the mirror and admitting that you haven't done what you knew you had to do. What hurts isn't the effort. It's the awareness that you betrayed yourself in silence over and over again. And there's nothing more exhausting than living in that state, knowing what you want but not moving, understanding what you need but postponing it, feeling that you could do more, but not daring to prove it. And the greatest danger isn't that you lose everything. The real risk is that you learn to live like this, that you get used to it, that you adapt to a comfortable, predictable existence without jolts, but also without depth, without intensity, without meaning. Because when you get used to not acting, you also become numb to the internal call that pushed you to do so. You stop listening to your intuition. You stop responding to your ambition. You become someone who survives but who no longer builds anything. And this isn't about demanding perfection from yourself, nor living in a constant state of alert. It's about being honest with yourself, about understanding that if something matters to you, it can't keep waiting, that if something burns inside you, it won't go out no matter how much you try to distract yourself, that if there's a pending decision, a postponed step, an uncomfortable conversation you're avoiding, all of that is already having an impact. You won't notice it immediately, but you will feel it. In your mood, in your results, in the way you see yourself. And when that happens, when you realize that the price you're paying is your own peace, maybe you'll understand that it's not worth waiting to be ready. Because you won't be. Because nobody is. Because in reality, the only thing you need is to start. Not perfectly, not completely, just start. With fear, with doubts, with whatever you have. But start. Because what you're postponing won't evaporate. It's waiting for you with the bill in hand. And the longer you wait, the higher it will be. Not in money, not in material things. In something far more valuable. Your time, your integrity, your ability to trust yourself when you need it most. And that, even if it's not visible from the outside, even if no one demands it from you, is already costing you much more than you think. Chapter 2. You don't need motivation. You need shame. There's a scene that repeats itself in too many lives. People waiting for the perfect moment, the revealing advice, the book that will wake them up, the phrase that will push them to change once and for all. They sit in front of a video, open a productivity app, jot down neat titles in a notebook, make lists of goals, and convince themselves for a few minutes that this time, it's serious. But nothing happens. Another week wasted. Another empty promise. Another noble intention dragged by inertia. And it's not that they don't want to change. It's not that they don't dream of another version of themselves. They want it. Of course they want it. But they want it without paying the price. They want the result without the sacrifice. They want to feel motivated instead of feeling shame. Motivation is nice. It's pleasant. It's comfortable. It makes you feel good for a while, gives you an illusion of progress, makes you believe that the mere fact of having thought about it already puts you on the path. But it's not true. Motivation is a lightweight fuel, volatile. It works when everything is in order, when the climate is ideal, when the body responds and the mind cooperates. But in real life, in the life you actually live, not the one you imagine, the conditions almost never line up. That's why, if your plan depends on feeling motivated, you're going to be stuck most of the time. What does work, what ignites you from within and doesn't let you stay where you are, is something much more uncomfortable. The shame of knowing you're failing yourself. Not that paralyzing shame that fills you with useless guilt. I'm talking about that brutal and honest discomfort that appears when you look at yourself clearly and realize you aren't doing what you know you should be doing. That direct gaze that needs no witnesses or applause. Only truth. Because deep down, you know when you're acting with integrity. And when you're acting like a spectator who excuses himself with reasons disguised as valid justifications. That shame that burns when you see your reflection and realize you're stealing time, energy, and dignity from yourself. That you could be stronger, more awake, more alive. But you keep waiting for something external to push you. That you could be advancing, but you keep telling yourself the same cheap story that you're not ready, that you lack motivation, that the moment isn't now. And it's not about punishment. It's about awareness. Because there comes a point when shame becomes the most real drive you have. Not because it's pleasant, but because it's impossible to ignore. And when you accept it, when you don't dodge it or cover it with distractions, it transforms. It becomes that internal fire that makes you move even when you don't feel like it, even when you have no certainties, even when you're still full of doubts. Because you understand that you can't keep negotiating with yourself every step you take, that you can't keep circling the same issue hoping for a revelation. Someone who truly respects themselves doesn't wait to feel motivated. They do what they have to do, even if it weighs on them, even if it makes them uncomfortable, even if it hurts. Because they understand that consistency doesn't always come with applause or immediate satisfaction. It comes with that uncomfortable silence, with that gap between what you want and how hard it is to get there. And that's precisely where most people give up. And so there they are, looking for another dose of motivation, as if it were a short-acting drug. They repeat mantras they no longer feel, follow people who say the same old things, get excited about perfect habits, routines that last 3 days, promises of results in 30 days or less. And all of that sounds good, looks good, but it doesn't change you. Because what you need isn't for someone to tell you again that you can. What you need is to look at yourself without filters and feel a bit of shame for everything you've been avoiding. Because when you reach that point, you no longer need so much inspiring content. You don't need another book, another phrase, another guru. You need to respond to that turmoil inside you. To that weariness with yourself, not physical, but emotional. That feeling that if you don't do something now, you will end up getting used to living below what you're capable of being. And that, though it doesn't sound motivating, is the most mobilizing thing there is. There are decisions that don't take shape until the discomfort is so great that you can't keep pretending. There are changes that aren't born from desire, but from exasperation. There are movements that only appear when hitting rock bottom isn't a metaphor, but a real experience. And though it's hard to be there, it's also the best place from which you can build something that won't crumble at the first breeze. Because motivation is fragile, but shame, when channeled well, is powerful. It forces you to stop romanticizing the process. It pushes you to stop theorizing and start executing. It pulls you out of fantasy and plants you firmly on the ground. Not because it's pleasant, but because it's unavoidable. And when you use that discomfort as fuel, you no longer care so much whether you're in the right mood, whether you slept well, whether you feel like it or not. You do what you have to do because you understand that every day without action is a day you're moving away from your truest, strongest, most dignified self. And that's what hurts. Not what you can't achieve. What hurts is knowing you're not really trying. That pain, that internal discomfort, that lack of pride you live with in silence, can be your driving force. You don't need to love what you do at first. You don't need everything to make sense from step one. You just need to stop lying to yourself, to tell yourself the unvarnished truth, to recognize yourself in that mirror without dressing up as a victim or an eternal dreamer. You don't need motivation. You need to be so fed up with your own passivity, so uncomfortable with your excuses, so eager to break free from that lukewarm version of yourself that you have no choice but to act. Not out of enthusiasm, but out of urgency. And that moment, though uncomfortable, is the one that changes everything. Not the one that inspires you, but the one that shakes you. The one that doesn't feel good, but puts you in motion. Because you understand that if you wait to be ready, if you wait for everything to align, if you wait to feel butterflies every time you face a challenge, you'll keep waiting while your life slips through your hands. And when you finally accept it, when you stop asking for permission and seeking validation, when you use that shame not to punish yourself, but to wake up, that's when the real begins. That's when the change that doesn't need pretty phrases or empty promises starts. It only needs one decision, one deep enough to carry you when enthusiasm runs out. Because it's not motivation you're missing. What you're missing is a level of honesty so brutal, so uncomfortable, so raw, that you can't look at your life the same way again without wanting to transform it completely. Chapter 3. The action you avoid is the one that transforms you the most. You know exactly which one it is. You don't need to think too much. As soon as you hear it, when that phrase appears, you already have in your mind what you've been evading. It's not confusion. It's not lack of clarity. It's fear. Not a dramatic fear, not an overwhelming panic. It's that silent fear dressed up in logic, prudence, responsibility, planning. It's that subtle mechanism that makes you believe it still isn't the right time, that maybe you should wait a bit longer, prepare a bit more, secure certain things before moving. But that's not true. You don't do it because you know that exact thing, just that one, will change you. Because it's not just any action. It's the one that cracks open your current version. The one that breaks structures. The one that doesn't happen without consequences. Because it transforms. And everything that transforms hurts. You don't avoid the small stuff. You don't dodge the irrelevant. What you postpone is what could change the course of your life if you dared. And that's why you circle around it, justify it, bury it under a pile of secondary tasks that make you feel productive but don't move you an inch. Because doing what's important hurts. Not for its physical cost, but for what it demands mentally and emotionally. Because that pending call means accepting something you don't want to hear. Because that boundary you don't set could break a dynamic that, even though it hurts you, you already know how to navigate. Because changing environments, ending a relationship, starting that project, facing that truth, all of that threatens the image of security you built, even if it's full of cracks. And so you prefer to move in the known, even if it hurts, even if it drains you. Meanwhile, you fill yourself with smart excuses. Because excuses don't always sound dumb. Some are so well crafted that they even convince others. But you know you're not choosing courageously, but choosing fear. That you're not prioritizing what matters, but what keeps you safe. That you're not postponing because you can't, but because you're terrified of what could happen if you dare. Because that action you avoid not only demands external movement, but also forces you to let go of a part of yourself. Of that part that has survived for years on empty speeches, on plans that never played out, on promises that only serve to soothe your guilt. And now you've reached the point where the relief no longer works. Because you know that continuing to wait isn't an option, that the cost of avoiding that action keeps getting higher, that you're becoming poorer inside each time you choose the easy, the neutral, the comfortable. Transformation never starts with something pleasant. It has no elegant presentation or promises of immediate well-being. It starts with tension, with a knot in your stomach, with the inner voice telling you that if you don't do it now, you'll start accepting a version of life you no longer believe in. And that hurts far more than any difficult action, because you avoid what matters. And what matters changes you. It doesn't transform you what you repeat on autopilot. It doesn't change you what you already master. What leaves a mark is what forces you to break your inertia. What tests your honesty. What exposes who you are when no one is watching. When no one congratulates you. When there's no immediate result applauding you. And that's where the real is built. Not when everything flows. Not when enthusiasm pushes you. But when you have to face the fact that if you don't do what you avoid, nothing will change. You'll keep repeating cycles, disguising your fear as patience, your paralysis as strategy. You'll keep acting as if you didn't know what you need to do, when the truth is, you do know, and you simply don't want to do it. Not because you're weak, not because you're incapable, because you know that once you do it, you can't go back. Because once you confront what you avoid, you'll have to live up to a new standard. Because you won't be able to say you didn't know, that you weren't ready, that it wasn't the right time. Transformation isn't about reaching a goal. It's about no longer tolerating certain lies you've been holding on to. It's about killing off a version of yourself that has expired. And that is uncomfortable. It's brutal. It's painful. But it's also necessary. That action you avoid, specifically that one, would not only move you forward, it would make you more honest. It would make you freer. Because there's no real freedom if you're not willing to make tough decisions. Because everything you avoid locks you up. And each time you dodge what you know you need to do, you reinforce your own prison. And no amount of motivation will save you when you're trapped in your own evasion. The only thing that can get you out of there is the conscious decision to face whatever it is you're avoiding. Without drama, without heroism, with the clarity that, though uncomfortable, that action will restore the self-respect you lost when you started betraying yourself in silence. There's nothing more transformative than acting from that place. Not from euphoria, not from external pressure, not from obligation, but from the awareness that if you don't do it, you'll keep dragging around an unease that never disappears. That accumulates. That shows up in progressively more destructive forms: discouragement, anxiety, frustration, emptiness. And when you finally do it, when you face what you were avoiding, everything shakes. Sometimes chaotically, sometimes quietly, but it moves. Because you're acting from a real place. Not from expectation, not from fantasy, from the body, from a clear mind, from that need to stop being a spectator in your own life. That action, precisely that one, doesn't transform with excuses. It doesn't dissolve with distractions. It doesn't resolve with abstract ideas. You do it. You execute it. And when you do, you feel the fear, yes, but you also feel freedom. Because at last, you stopped avoiding yourself. Chapter 4. You're closer than you think, but not how you imagine. Distance isn't always measured in kilometers, nor in months, nor in the size of your goals. There are distances that feel enormous, but can be broken with a single well-directed move. Because many times you're not as far away as you believe. What happens is you're looking through a distorted lens, one that magnifies the obstacles, making you believe you need much more time, more resources, more validation than you actually do. And when you live with that idea, your own mind becomes the biggest break. It's easy to think you're far when you compare your starting point to an exaggerated mental image of the destination. Because you don't see it as a series of concrete steps, you imagine it as a magical transformation, in which one day you suddenly wake up stronger, more confident, more capable. But that never happens. Never. People don't change overnight. They change when, at last, they make a different decision at the exact moment they would have done the same old thing. What's closer than you think isn't the final outcome, But that small turning point, that trajectory change that doesn't sound epic, that doesn't impress anyone, but that changes everything, because it's the first time you don't give in, don't postpone, don't use the same old script to justify what you're not doing. Transformation doesn't start with a dazzling revelation. It begins when you dare to stop waiting for something extraordinary and do something ordinary that you never had the courage to sustain. Because what separates you from what you want isn't a wall. It's a chain of small decisions repeated in the wrong direction. And reversing them doesn't require talent or luck. It requires presence. You're closer when you stop thinking in all or nothing terms. When you let go of that childish idea that if you can't do it perfectly, it isn't worth starting. You're closer when you accept that it won't be clean, nor orderly, nor obvious. That maybe you'll advance in silence without approval, without an immediate applause confirming you're on the right track. And even so, you keep going. The problem is they taught you to look at change from the outside, as if it were a story someone tells you, as if progress were visible from the start. But true changes don't make noise. They don't announce themselves. They're not posted on social media. Something happens inside you that only you can understand. It's not visible in your body yet, nor in your numbers, nor in your results. But you know something changed because that one time you got up when you didn't want to. You said no when it was easier to say yes. You finished something you would have abandoned before. And that's where real progress begins. Not when you've already arrived, but when your actions stop resembling those of the person you used to be. What's closer isn't a goal. It's a moment of honesty in which you finally accept that you don't need everything you thought you needed. That you were waiting for a sign, some help, external motivation, when in reality you already had everything, except the willingness to get uncomfortable. Because that's what shortens the distance. Not resources, not knowledge, not technique. What brings you closer is the exact moment you decide to do what you say you want, even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if you don't know how it'll turn out, even if there are no guarantees. And that's where many get stuck. Not because they can't, but because they can't bear the idea of getting closer without any certainties. They'd rather stay in the comfortable zone of complaining, of eternal analysis, of perfectionism that sounds like commitment, but is really pure fear in disguise. The truth is, you're almost never going to feel completely ready. And if you wait for that sense of absolute certainty to move, you'll keep believing you're far when in reality the only thing standing between you and your goal is a sustained decision. Sometimes you're one change of focus away. Sometimes you're one pending conversation away. Sometimes you're one renunciation you've been avoiding away. And all of that seems minimal, but it contains immense power. Because what really transforms you isn't what you dream of achieving, but what you're willing to let go of. You're not far. You're distracted. You're giving too much importance to the wrong map. One that focuses on the outcome and not on behavior. One that makes you think you need ideal conditions, when in reality, what you need is to break free from a version of yourself that you already know doesn't represent you. It's not easy, and it doesn't have to be. But it's possible. And that possibility grows each time you stop imagining how the perfect path should look and start walking the path you have to, with what you have, from where you are. There's no magic return, no emotional shortcut. What shortens the distance is your willingness to stop being the person who's been postponing decisions that were ready to be taken. Because many times it's not about moving faster, but about stopping looking the other way. Stopping lying to yourself that everything requires more time, when deep down you know what you need isn't more time, but more courage. And that courage doesn't always feel like an explosion of strength. Sometimes it's a deep weariness, an exhaustion that becomes momentum. A moment when you realize you can't keep postponing your life for fear of not making it perfect from the start. What you believe to be far begins to draw near as soon as you stop constructing an unattainable mental image and start seeing the process for what it is: a daily, uncomfortable, silent work. Not something that transforms you overnight, but something that carves you from within as you choose to move forward even without all the answers. And when that happens, when you surrender to the imperfect step, to the raw attempt, to action without guarantees, you realize you are closer than you thought. Not because you've already arrived, but because you're finally walking toward something real, not toward an illusion. And that changes everything. Chapter 5. Nobody owes you anything, and that's the best thing that could have happened to you. For too long you got used to waiting. Waiting for others to understand what you're going through. Waiting for someone to acknowledge your effort, your consistency, your good intentions. Waiting for life to give you something back for all you've given, for all you've endured, for all you've done in silence. But that moment never comes. And it's not because there's something wrong with you. It's simply because the world isn't designed to reward those who wait, but to reward those who act without depending on recognition. Nobody owes you anything. Not for being a good person, nor for having done everything right, nor for having suffered more than you should have. Nobody is responsible for lifting you when you fall, for giving you opportunities, for reminding you of your worth, for returning what you lost. It may hurt to accept it, especially if you've spent years waiting for a gesture that never came, a word that was never spoken, support that never appeared. But when you truly understand it, when you stop demanding that the world pay off a debt that never existed, something changes inside you. You stop looking outward. You stop using your story as justification, and you begin to build from a different place, more solid, more sober, more real. No longer as someone who claims what they're owed, but as someone who takes what they deserve because they decided to. Not because of entitlement, but because of responsibility. Because you understand that if you stay waiting for something to change, for someone to come, for life to compensate you, you're giving up control of your life to factors you can't manage. Yes, it would be easier if we were all seen, if every effort were recognized, if the world were fair and balanced. But it's not. Life doesn't reward those who deserve it the most. It rewards those who try the hardest, those who endure, those who persist even when there are no guarantees, those who keep moving forward even when no one's watching. The greatest act of freedom you can have isn't doing what you want, but understanding that you don't need anyone's permission, that you're not waiting for anyone's signal, that you don't depend on approval, endorsement, or permission from others to live as you know you could live. Every time you wait for recognition, you're tied to an illusion, to the idea that there's some universal justice that will reward you if you just stay being good. But what really changes your life isn't passive goodness. It's the conscious decision to move forward, even when there isn't a single cheer. That moment, the instant you understand that no one is coming to save you, is also the instant you finally take charge. Not as punishment, but as an opportunity. Because if no one owes you anything, then no one has the power to stop you from moving forward. If everything you achieve depends on you, you no longer have to negotiate your worth with anyone. You do it because you want to, because you can, because it's your turn. And that doesn't make you cold. It makes you aware. Because beginning to live without the burden of what should be given to you by others is beginning to live without emotional ties that no longer serve you. It's stopping asking others to fill voids that only you can close. It's stopping justifying your pauses with what you didn't receive, and beginning to build with what you can give. A new strength appears when you stop looking back searching for compensation. When you accept that no one owes you anything, that they won't give it to you, that if you don't take the initiative, no one will for you. And far from making you bitter, that strengthens you, because you stop waiting. And when you stop waiting, everything you do begins to take on a different meaning. Because you do it out of conviction, not reaction. Because you're no longer driven by emptiness, you're driven by decision. Many get trapped in the idea that someone else has the key. That change will come when someone recognizes their potential, when someone gives them the opportunity they're waiting for, when the environment improves, when conditions align. But the more time you spend waiting for something external to arrive, the further you are from taking the control that's yours. And the more you wait, the more frustration you accumulate. Because there's a part of you that knows you could have started already. That knows that deep down, you're not tied up by what you don't have, but by what you're not willing to let go of. The expectation that someone else will take responsibility for you. That's what weakens you the most. Not the lack of resources, not past mistakes, not what you missed out on in childhood, nor the times you weren't chosen. What holds you back the most is continuing to believe that those things still need to be fixed. As if it were necessary to receive some sort of emotional compensation before you can move forward. No, life doesn't stop to settle pending accounts. Life goes on. And if you don't move forward with it, you get left behind. Not as punishment, but as a consequence. Because time doesn't wait. Because the perfect moment doesn't exist. Because no one can do for you what you're refusing to do for yourself. And once you accept that truth, even if it's uncomfortable, you begin to feel a different clarity. You no longer have to convince anyone. You no longer need someone to recognize everything you did before. Now it's different. Now it's about what you're willing to do today, with what you have from where you are. And that's where real strength begins. Not the kind that depends on mood. Not the kind that needs validation. The kind that comes from someone who decided not to live asking for what was never promised. From someone who builds without expecting applause. From someone who takes responsibility even when no one is watching. That kind of person doesn't need favors, doesn't wait for miracles, doesn't depend on luck. They get up, they learn, they move forward. Because they know that what they achieve won't be what the world gave them, but what they were capable of taking when there was no one else but themselves to lean on. Chapter 6. You are the result of what you let pass. There are things that marked you deeply, things you chose, others that were imposed on you, some that you learned out of habit, fear, or necessity. But what defines you most, far more than all of that, is what you decided to allow. Because ultimately, you are not only what you do, you are, above all, what you tolerate. What you accept as part of your life without questioning it. What you let pass when you knew you should have set a limit. What you choose to stay silent about when you knew you should have spoken up. What you repeat even though, deep down, you know it's draining you. And the hardest thing to recognize is not the mistake, but the habit. Because a mistake is punctual, visible, easy to point out. But a habit settles in. It becomes part of the background. It turns into that thick air you breathe every day without noticing. And suddenly, you're surrounded by situations you didn't consciously choose, but permitted through silence. Not because you're weak or lack intelligence. You did it because learning to say, "that's enough," requires a dose of courage that's uncomfortable. And more often than not, you prefer to avoid that discomfort. Every time you let something pass that you know isn't for you, you're sending a message. Not to others, but to yourself. You're telling yourself that you can betray yourself a little more, that you can endure it, that it's normal, that it'll straighten itself out on its own, that it's not that serious, that it's better not to stir up conflicts, that maybe tomorrow you'll have more strength. But tomorrow never comes, and what does come is wear and tear. And you don't feel it all at once. It doesn't show from one day to the next, but it accumulates. It manifests as a lack of energy, chronic demotivation, that disconnection you can't quite put into words. Because when you get used to letting pass what makes you uncomfortable, what hurts you, what limits you, you also move away from what connects you, what inspires you, what lights you up. Accepting the unacceptable isn't an act of humility. It's self-abandonment. And the more you repeat it, the more normal it seems to you. Until you realize that you've become someone who simply adapts, who no longer questions, no longer defends themselves, no longer chooses. They just react. They just accommodate. They just try to make the storm less severe instead of going out to face it once and for all. And it's not about being a hard person, living defensively, or picking fights over everything. It's about remembering that there are things you cannot keep letting pass without them running over you. There are comments, gestures, attitudes, routines, decisions that, however small they may seem, are shaping you. Because what you accept once out of convenience, you then accept by habit. And what used to make you uncomfortable, eventually you no longer even feel. But it keeps marking you all the same. It's not your environment that holds you back the most. It's your permission for what you know you should no longer carry. It's your lack of honesty each time you pretend everything is fine so as not to rock the boat. But the waters are already churning inside. You just learn to ignore it. You learn to numb yourself. You learn to walk without making noise, without bothering, without causing discomfort. And on that silent path, you dimmed your own light. Personal freedom doesn't begin when you achieve great things. It begins when you decide, with clarity, to stop accepting what pulls you away from who you know you could be. And that doesn't happen with one grand decision. It happens with hundreds of small, daily, seemingly harmless decisions. It happens when you decide to no longer justify what no longer fits you. When you stop explaining yourself, apologizing, giving in reflexively. Because if you think calmly, many of the things you tolerate today you wouldn't even choose if you were starting from scratch. But they're already there, installed, embedded in your routine, disguised as commitment, as stability, as that's life. And the problem isn't having to deal with the difficult. The problem is having given up the possibility of changing it simply because it takes time. Simply because it scares you. Simply because you don't know exactly what will happen if you dare to take the step. And yes, when you start putting real boundaries, some people will get upset. Some will leave. Others will look at you differently. But it's not your duty to sustain dynamics that hurt you just because someone else is comfortable in them. You're not here to fit into places where you can't breathe. You're not here to maintain the superficial calm of a life that consumes you from within. You're here to build something of your own, something you can sustain without having to pretend, something that feels coherent, something that, even if it's hard, is worth it. And you only achieve that when you learn to say enough without feeling guilty. When you understand that setting a limit is not being selfish, it's being faithful. Faithful to yourself, to your energy, to your vision, to your story. Because you know how much it cost you to get here. How many things you had to endure when no one noticed. And that's why you deserve to be selective about what you let in. Being clear about what you allow doesn't make you cold. It makes you healthy. Because the opposite is carrying on what isn't yours, what doesn't add, what only takes up space. And the more space you give to what drains you, the less energy you have for what truly matters. You are not the result of what you dreamed. You are the result of what you decided to endure, of what you let pass, of what you allowed to repeat. And that's why changing doesn't mean doing something extraordinary. Changing means starting to take responsibility for the everyday, for those things that seem small, but that, when repeated enough, rewrite you from the inside. From now on, don't ask yourself only what you want to achieve. Also ask yourself what you're willing to no longer allow. What things no longer belong to you. What habits have no place anymore. What words, what excuses, what people, what rhythms. Because therein lies true transformation. Not in adding, but in clearing away. Not in achieving more, but in sustaining fewer things that don't represent you. It's not about fighting everything that doesn't fit. It's about stopping living by adapting to what doesn't build you. And if you're capable of that, there's no version of you can't reclaim, no strength you can't feel again. Chapter 7. You think you lack discipline, but you have too much noise. It's easy to blame discipline. It's the first thing that comes to mind when something doesn't hold. I lack consistency. I'm too unstable. I have no willpower. You tell yourself that every time you abandon something you started with enthusiasm. Every time you step back as soon as things stop being comfortable. Every time emotional exhaustion, though invisible, gets the better of you. But maybe the problem isn't that. Maybe you're not lacking discipline. Maybe you're simply trying to build in the middle of noise that doesn't let you think, decide, or maintain focus for more than 2 minutes straight. Noise is not just external. It's not only messages, social media alerts, the barrage of stimuli that bombards you without respite. The hardest noise to manage is internal. That whirlwind of thoughts that never silence themselves. That constant need to be doing something, to have everything resolved, to never stop for a second. That feeling that if you're not busy, something is wrong. But being busy is not advancing. It's just moving a lot without direction. And so, no matter how motivated you are, no matter how clear your goal is, it becomes impossible to stay on track. Because there is no discipline that survives a saturated environment. No routine works if every time you try to focus, 10 new distractions appear that feel urgent. There is no consistency if every time you start something, your mind is occupied with everything else. With what didn't go well, with what's missing, with what you could be doing better, with what someone said, with what you still don't dare to face. Your problem isn't lack of ability. It's an excess of interference. You've confused action with reaction. You spend your day responding, putting out fires, absorbing others' energy, comparing yourself to lives that aren't real, trying to fit all the pieces together without stopping for a second. And then, when you realize you haven't advanced in what truly matters, you explain it as a discipline issue. As if you didn't have what it takes. As if others had it easier. But what you lack is not discipline. It's silence. It's focus. It's deciding what deserves your attention and what doesn't. It's reducing. It's choosing with strength what you're going to do, and with the same strength, deciding what you're going to ignore. Because if everything is important, then nothing is. If everything demands your energy, you don't have any left for what truly moves your life. Think of the moments when you were truly focused, not motivated, focused. Those moments when you knew exactly what you had to do, when you didn't need anyone to remind you why you were doing it. Moments when the idea of quitting wasn't even an option because you were completely aligned with yourself. That version of you exists. The problem is, you drown it in noise, in demands that don't come from you, in distractions that you yourself let in pressures that aren't yours, but that you carry as if they were. And the more noise there is, the harder it becomes to act with clarity. You start to doubt yourself, to question every decision, to overthink, to re-examine everything before moving, to circle around issues you had already resolved. And that constant confusion exhausts, not because you're weak, but because no one can hold up if every step comes accompanied by an avalanche of interference. What you need is not to become stronger. It's to remove what weakens you. You don't have to build a perfect routine. You have to stop overwhelming yourself, overloading yourself, fragmenting yourself into 100 things at once. Because you cannot concentrate if you're everywhere except where you are. You can't commit to a process if each day you bombard yourself with new ideas, new goals, new comparisons that only pull you away from the path you already chose. And that has a price. Because every time you abandon something important for something urgent, your mind learns that there is always something else that deserves your attention. That there is always a valid excuse not to continue. That you can always justify yourself with fatigue, with lack of time, with anything else that sounds reasonable. And bit by bit, your word loses weight for you. Your intentions empty out. Your commitments dissolve. Not out of bad will, out of noise. The day you begin to protect your focus with the same zeal you protect your free time, something will change. The day you start saying no firmly, not only to others, but to yourself, to that part of you that wants to be everywhere and ends up being nowhere. You'll discover that you had more discipline than you thought. You had just buried it under layer upon layer of unnecessary interference. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer distractions. You need to structure your environment, both physical and mental, so that it doesn't compete with what you're trying to build. You need to reclaim your attention as if it were a valuable resource, because it is. Because every time you do something without intention, each time you check something without purpose, every automatic decision you repeat out of inertia is a small theft from your capacity to advance. And no one will give that back to you. No one will come to organize your mind, reduce your to-do list, set boundaries for you. That too is your responsibility. Because if you keep believing the problem is that you lack discipline, you'll keep looking for solutions where they're not. You'll keep forcing yourself to follow routines you can't maintain because the problem isn't the system. It's that you're trying to be consistent in an environment that doesn't allow consistency. Clarity is non-negotiable. It's built. And discipline isn't a heroic quality. It's the logical consequence of a focused mind. If you manage to remove the noise that doesn't serve you, if you start making space for what's important, if you stop living in a state of permanent interruption, you'll notice your capacity to sustain what matters will appear. Not as a struggle, but as a natural response to the silence you didn't have before. So before you keep blaming yourself for what you haven't managed to sustain, review how much noise you're allowing. Examine what you give your attention to automatically. Review which conversations, which ideas, which distractions occupy space in your mind without adding anything. Because most of what you call lack of discipline is simply lack of real focus. And that focus doesn't appear on its own. You create it, you defend it, you train it. Not when everything is in order, but especially when chaos tries to slip in from all sides. Because when everything competes for your energy, true strength is knowing what you will protect first. Chapter 8. You're not tired, you're distracted. You wake up feeling heavy. Hours go by and you can't fully get going. You handle the urgent tasks, check off items, do the bare minimum so the day passes without surprises. But something inside you remains off. And even if you slept enough, even if physically you're fine, that feeling of exhaustion doesn't go away. It's not the body. It's something deeper, harder to explain, more persistent. And so you convince yourself you're worn out, that you can't do more, that what you need is rest. But rest isn't what's missing. It's direction. You're not tired. You're distracted, saturated with stimuli that have no real purpose, busy with things that don't belong to you, reacting to everything except what truly matters, filling your time with activities that keep your mind entertained but empty your soul. And that, even if you don't see it, drains you more than any physical effort. What exhausts you is not work, not routine, not commitment. What truly drains you is living in a kind of chronic disconnection from what you do. It's the contradiction of moving without advancing, of occupying yourself without purpose, of being present in 1,000 things that don't touch you, and absent in what needs you most, yourself. Your energy doesn't vanish because you do too much. It goes away because you don't do what you should, because you postpone conversations with yourself, because you become an expert at avoiding yourself, at entertaining yourself with what doesn't hurt, with what doesn't demand, with what doesn't transform. And in that constant escape, you lose strength, not because you can't do more, but because you no longer find meaning. And when there is no meaning, everything costs twice as much. Everything weighs. Everything irritates. You get tired even before you start. You look for breaks every half hour. You check the clock as if you're waiting for the day to end soon, even though you know tomorrow will be the same. It's not about how many hours you work. It's about which part of you is being worn out by living divided. One part wants to move forward. The other just wants to vanish. And in that tug of war, the soul grows weary. You're distracted because you've gotten used to speed but not to purpose. You jump from one thing to another without asking yourself if it really matters. You say yes to everything that diverts you and no, again and again, to what would truly build something within you. And you don't do it out of bad will. You do it because urgency always shouts louder than importance. Because you've confused movement with progress. Because you believe that as long as you're doing something, you're moving forward. But you're not. Not everything that moves takes you where you want to go. The exhaustion you feel is the result of so many automatic decisions. Of telling yourself you'll start tomorrow, that it'll work itself out, that it's just a phase. But that phase has lasted too long. And what continues to sustain it isn't your weakness. It's your distraction. Because there's something you don't want to look at. Something you avoid facing. And the more you avoid it, the more you fill yourself with activities that don't commit you but occupy space. Because not everything that tires you deserves your attention. Many of the things you do each day, if you were honest with yourself, you could eliminate without losing anything important. But you don't because they give you a sense of control, of security, of structure. Even though they don't take you anywhere. Even though they're stealing from you exactly what you need most. Your mental energy, your emotional clarity, your ability to choose consciously. And there lies the problem. It's not fatigue. It's how far you've drifted from yourself. How distant you are from your real priorities. How much noise you've normalized. Because living like this, awake with your eyes open, operating on autopilot, seems like a temporary solution. But it becomes a habit. One that dims you, that buries you, that flattens you. And you know it. You know you can't continue much longer this way. That no matter how much you try to compensate with new distractions, with rests that don't rest, with breaks that only postpone, there's something that remains unresolved. Because it's not about stopping. It's about returning. Returning to yourself. Returning to your center. Returning to connect with what truly ignites you, with what truly matters, with what truly has meaning, even if it tires you. Because the curious thing is that exhaustion disappears when you find something that truly sets you on fire. Something that doesn't need to justify its value. Something that doesn't feel like a burden, but like fire. And then you understand that what was lacking wasn't more sleep. It was committing to what gives you life. Energy returns when you clear away, when you stop saying yes out of obligation, when you stop doing things out of duty, when you decide to reclaim your time, your attention, your mind. You don't need to leave the world behind. You need to stay, but with intention. To take control. To choose again, to stop investing your energy in things that build nothing. And yes, doing that means you lose things. It means letting go of commitments that no longer fit you. It means disappointing those who expect you to keep fulfilling a role you no longer want. It means leaving empty spaces that you used to fill with shallow busyness. But it also means breathing again. Breathing again and feeling that what you do belongs to you. That you're not giving your days away in exchange for a false tranquility. When you finally reclaim your attention, fatigue disappears. Not because you stop working, but because you put your strength at the service of something that connects you. And that is where real rest lies, not in sleeping more, in stopping betraying yourself. So before you keep repeating that you're tired, ask yourself honestly what's distracting you. Ask yourself what you've been saying yes to when you should have said no long ago. Ask yourself how much of your exhaustion comes from being in places that don't build you, from maintaining habits that no longer represent you, from responding to demands you didn't choose. You're not tired. You're disconnected. You're distracted by things that shouldn't be so present. You're pushing a version of yourself that no longer serves you. And that's why your energy falls short. No matter how much you rest, no matter how hard you try. The day you decide to clear your internal space, the day you truly make silence, the day you focus where you need to, you'll discover you weren't weak. You were just overwhelmed. You didn't lack strength. You had too much confusion. You didn't need more rest. You needed to reconnect with something that truly matters. Chapter 9. Nobody cares about your potential. There is a word you have heard your whole life as if it were a compliment. They told you that you had potential, that you were talented, that with a bit more focus you could go far, that if you wanted you could achieve great things. And at first you believed it. You felt it as validation, as a promise, as if your worth were guaranteed by what you might become someday. But over time that word began to weigh on you. Because potential, when it's not realized, becomes a shadow that won't stop following you. The world is full of people with potential. People who could, who almost did, who were on the brink, who have everything necessary but keep waiting for the perfect moment. Complete clarity, absolute confidence. And while they wait, life goes by. It doesn't pause to ask how much talent you have, nor how many times you imagined a better version of yourself. Life moves forward with those who do, not with those who dream. No one is going to pay you for your potential. No one is going to give you an opportunity just because you have good ideas, good intentions, or an inspiring story. No one is going to stop their journey to push you on yours. Because in the end, the only thing that matters is what you do. Not what you could do. Not what you will try someday. What you are building now. With what you have. With what you know. With what you can. And this is not a criticism. It's an invitation. Because as long as you keep feeding the idea that you have something special that you will activate sooner or later, you're telling yourself a story that only serves to soothe your conscience. Because you believe that the mere fact of having potential already makes you different. But the only thing that sets you apart from others is not what you could be. It's what you are already doing with what you have. You don't need more validation. You don't need another assessment of your abilities. What you need is to realize that having potential guarantees you nothing if you're not willing to make it real. Because potential runs out. Not because you lose it, but because it stops mattering. Because if you don't develop it, it becomes invisible. And when it becomes invisible, it becomes irrelevant. The problem isn't that you lack what's necessary. It's that you continue protecting a version of yourself that has never been tested. A version that lives in your imagination. That thrives on promises, on projections, on phrases like, when I have more time, when I feel more secure, when the conditions are right. But those phrases get repeated so much that they end up empty. They become an elegant way not to act. And the more you repeat that story, the more you get used to living in almost. Almost I try. Almost I start. Almost I dare. And that almost is not harmless. It anesthetizes you. It makes you feel you're close when really you're standing still. Because one thing is having the capacity, and another very different thing is bearing the cost of developing it. Talent is useless if you're not willing to discipline it. And vision transforms nothing if it's not accompanied by uncomfortable decisions. Most people don't fail for lack of skill. They fail because they evade too much, because of that silent habit of postponing what's important under the excuse that they're still getting ready. But you don't need more preparation. You need more exposure. You need to put yourself on the line. Stop perfecting what you haven't started. Leave that safe zone where everything you could be sounds grandiose, but where none of it becomes concrete. Because the world isn't waiting for your potential. It's waiting for your results, your actions, your real presence, your tangible contribution. Not what you could give, but what you decide to give every day, even with fear, even with doubts, even knowing you could do better, but doing it anyway. Because that's what sets you apart. Commitment to the imperfect, consistency amidst uncertainty, the courage to act without guarantees. And if this makes you uncomfortable, good, because discomfort is a sign that something inside is stirring, something that can't stay the same, something that no longer fits the someday narrative. Because deep down you know it. You're no longer in a stage of discovery. You're in a stage of execution. It's no longer about accumulating ideas. It's about building something that lasts. Stop protecting your potential as if it were a delicate jewel. It isn't. It's raw material. And like all raw materials, it needs to be worked, polished, molded, with effort, with mistakes, with exposure. Because only in use does it transform. Only in wear does it strengthen. And the more you use it, the more clarity you gain about what you can truly contribute. Not from fantasy, but from experience. Begin to distrust everything that sounds good but doesn't turn into action. Begin to question yourself every time you catch yourself saying you could do something, but not now. Begin to accept that if you're not willing to make mistakes, you're not willing to grow. Because everything worthwhile will risk you. It will demand more than you thought. It will push you beyond your comfortable image of someone with potential. And that's where the real starts. Not when everything aligns, but when you decide to move forward even if nothing does. Because you understand that what you are isn't written. It's written, and you write it with every choice, with every well-used minute, with every necessary renunciation, with each promise that you stop repeating and begin fulfilling, even if in silence, even if no one sees it, even if there are no visible results immediately. No one cares about your potential because no one's life changes by how good you could be if you wanted. What changes things is what you do, what you sustain, what you offer without seeking applause. And when you finally understand that, the excuses end. It's no longer about waiting. It's about giving, about being, about doing. Because the difference isn't in what you carry inside. It's in what you're willing to put on the table when you can no longer hide behind what someday you could become. Chapter 10. What bothers you about others is telling you something about yourself. Sometimes you believe the problem is the other person. That person who talks too much, who doesn't listen, who doesn't respect, who acts without thinking, who seems to live without the slightest awareness of the impact they have on others. Their attitude bothers you, the way they say things, how they impose themselves, how they hide, how they manipulate, how they pretend. And you don't always say it out loud, but you think it. You keep it inside, and you feel it. The problem is that you almost never stop to observe which part of that behavior is reflecting something in you. Because not everything others do bothers you. There are behaviors that simply leave you indifferent, and there are others that, for some reason, stick in your mind. They bother you more than expected. They knock you off center, and that, even if you don't like to admit it, has far more to do with you than with the other person. Because we don't react the same way to everything. What irritates you says more about your own wounds than about the other's mistakes. Often, it's not what they do that bothers you, but what it activates in you. An insecurity you haven't resolved. A part of you you still aren't willing to look at. A trait of yours that you repress and that you see reflected in the other person, amplified, without filters. And because you can't tolerate it in yourself, you can't tolerate it in anyone. You're annoyed by the person who imposes themselves because you never learned how to set boundaries. You're upset by the person who shines without guilt because you still feel uncomfortable when you stand out. You're irritated by the one who speaks with confidence because you live doubting everything you think. You're annoyed by the one who doesn't stop to think about others because you spend your life doing just that, even when it wears you down. And what bothers you is not only what you see, it's that it forces you to recognize what you haven't been able to resolve within yourself. And this is not about justifying harmful behaviors, nor about staying silent in the face of injustice. It's about starting to use your reactions as mirrors, as signals, as opportunities to grow instead of always repeating the same pattern, pointing outward and avoiding the real work. Because if every person who bothers you is simply the problem, then you become a victim of everyone. You're at the mercy of the world. You spend your life wishing others would change, correct themselves, improve, do things differently. And in that attempt to make the world fit your mold, the only result is that you reinforce your own paralysis. Real transformation begins when you accept that your discomfort also belongs to you. That if something gets under your skin, there's an issue to resolve. An issue that is not fixed by changing the other. It's fixed by looking at yourself without defense. Understanding that your most rigid judgments often come from places where you feel fragile. Because if you were completely at peace with who you are, you wouldn't need to react so strongly to others' faults. You wouldn't break down over someone's arrogance, over someone's unconsciousness, over the emotional clumsiness of someone who doesn't know how to behave. You'd be annoyed, yes, but it wouldn't throw you off balance. It wouldn't drive you to the extreme of wanting to change the other so you could feel okay. Your ability to observe without reacting isn't coldness. It's maturity. It's understanding that often the other person is acting from their own wounds, from their history, from their chaos. And you don't have to carry that. But neither can you use it as an excuse not to take responsibility for what's yours. Because even when the other is wrong, your reaction remains yours. And that's where you have power. That's where you can grow. It's not about resignation. It's about asking yourself why that, bothers you so much. Which button is it pushing? Which part of you is activated? Which story are you repeating without realizing it? And there, in that discomfort, at that exact moment when you want to point the finger at someone else, you can choose to look inward. Not to blame yourself, but to understand yourself. Because every time you do that work, you gain freedom. You're no longer tied to others' gestures. You no longer need everyone to act the way you want in order to feel okay. You become clearer, more aware, more capable of deciding how to respond instead of reacting reflexively. And that emotional freedom isn't bought. It's not learned from a book. It's not activated by a phrase. It's trained. It's earned every time you choose to observe yourself instead of blame. Every time you choose to be silent, not to suppress yourself, but to understand which part of you needs attention. And yes, at first it hurts, because it's easier to think the world is full of toxic people than to accept that many times it's your own history distorting how you see others. But if you don't make that cut, if you don't stop that constant projection, you'll spend your life repeating the same pattern. You'll change environment, job, relationships, and the same conflicts will appear again. Because it wasn't them. It was you, acting from the same wound, from the same blindness, from the same need for others to fit your idea of what's right. And no one will meet that expectation, because they're not here for that. They're living their own lives, with their own burdens, their own contradictions, their own limits. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can reclaim control over your own life. What bothers you about others is not a coincidence. It's an invitation, sometimes brutal, sometimes uncomfortable, but always timely. And if instead of reacting with judgment, you react with self-awareness, that discomfort turns into a tool, into a pathway, into a possibility. Because every single thing that irritates you can help you know yourself better, if you're willing to stop running from yourself. Chapter 11. You're not afraid of failure. You're afraid it will work. Sometimes you say you don't move forward because you're afraid of failing, that you don't dare because you're not prepared, because you don't want to expose yourself, because you couldn't bear the frustration of something not turning out as you expect. But if you really pause to look inside, if you have the courage to scratch beneath what sounds logical, you'll discover that what really stops you isn't failure. It's the real possibility that it will work. Because if it works, the margin for postponing is gone. If it works, there are no more excuses. You can no longer keep hiding behind "when I have time," "when I'm more confident," "when I'm free of this or that." If it works, you'll have to maintain it. And that is where the true vertigo lies. Because achieving something is not the end of anything. It's the beginning of a new demand, one that no longer allows you to look back with nostalgia or lean on old justifications to stop. Failing, in a way, is more comfortable. Failure confirms your current version of yourself. It allows you to return to familiar ground. Yes, it hurts, but it's a familiar hurt. A hurt you already know how to explain, how to process, even how to share so that others understand. But having something succeed, having an idea work, starting to generate real results, that changes the rules of the game. It forces you to rise, to respond with another mentality, to leave behind everything that once felt safe but no longer has a place. Because when something begins to work, it not only changes the external, it changes your relationship with yourself. You stop being the one who dreams of and become the one who is doing it. And that requires a coherence that not everyone is ready to sustain. You can no longer talk about potential. Now you have to maintain the process, the pace, the result. And that, deep down, is what scares you most. Not something failing, but something working and forcing you to change. You're not accustomed to seeing yourself in real motion. You're more comfortable with the idea of progress than with progress itself. Because thinking, planning, imagining, visualizing, all that has its place. But it also has a trap. It keeps you in a zone where everything remains under control, where there is no risk, but there is also no transformation. Real action exposes you. It places you in front of decisions that used to be theory. And when they begin to succeed, you realize that you can no longer go back to the version of you who lived justifying your stillness. It no longer fits. It's no longer believable. Because now there is evidence, and evidence cannot be denied. When you start building something real, you face a new question. Are you willing to sustain what you are creating? That is what frightens you, because sustaining what works means giving up many things. Certain relationships, certain ideas, a part of your history that protected you until now. Because if something works, you have to accept that you always could have done it. And that is the hardest blow, realizing that it was not fear of failure that stopped you. It was the comfort of not having to take responsibility for your own greatness. Because achieving something important is not only an external conquest, it is an act of internal maturity. It is accepting that you are no longer the person who needed permission. It is acknowledging that you are ready to answer life with a different stance. And that implies stopping the search for validation, stopping looking sideways, stopping doubting every step. Because now you're in the game, you're inside. And of course, that is terrifying. Because what you're afraid of is not success, but what comes next. What you will have to sustain, what you will have to let go of, what you will have to change to avoid betraying yourself again. Because it's not just about achieving something, it's about becoming someone who can live at that new level without hiding again. The process does not get easier when things start going well. It becomes more demanding, more real, more profound. And that is the part no one tells you. That once something begins to work, there is no turning back. You can no longer lie to yourself as before. You can no longer say you didn't know how to do it. You can no longer hold on to the identity of someone who was trying. Because now you are doing it, and that changes you forever. So what are you really afraid of? Failing? Or having to answer to a new standard when you start doing it well? Because fear of failing is easy to name. It's understood. It's justified. But fear of growing, fear of shining, fear of having to sustain your best version without excuses, that fear is harder to admit. And yet, that is the fear you have to face if you really want to move forward. Because real progress is not measured by what you achieve, but by what you are willing to sustain when no one else is pushing you, when there's no immediate reward, when the only drive is your own commitment. So perhaps it's time to stop repeating that fear of failure is stopping you. Because the truth is that if you were truly afraid of failing, you wouldn't have gotten this far. The fear that has you paralyzed is another. It is the fear that everything you say you want might actually be possible. And then you'd have no choice but to step forward, to show yourself whole, to leave behind the protected, controlled, safe version of you that you've sustained for years. When that happens, and if you are willing to accept it, you will discover a new strength, one that does not depend on how much you achieve, but on how willing you are to live as someone who does not hide. Because when you accept that what you fear most is your own greatness, you no longer need to play at being someone who is about to start. Because you already know that the moment is not later. It's now. Chapter 12. If everything is all the same to you, you are no longer the same to yourself. There is a kind of exhaustion that isn't noticeable at first glance. One that makes no noise, doesn't erupt, doesn't complain. It's tiredness disguised as indifference, as lack of interest, as that I don't care, which at first seems harmless, but when repeated too many times, begins to rot everything it touches on the inside. It's not that everything is all the same to you because you've reached a point of peace or emotional maturity. It's that you've been dimming, little by little, without noticing. First, you let go of your desires. Then you released the details. Then you began to lose presence. And when you realized there was nothing left that moved you enough to bring you back to yourself, you began to look at everything from a distance, without reaction, without commitment, without connection. And no, that is not calmness. That is not balance. That is not having understood everything. That is having disconnected from yourself. Because when something truly matters to you, you feel it. And when you feel it, it moves you. It demands of you. It shakes you up. Even if it's uncomfortable. Even if you don't always understand it. What truly matters to you does not leave you indifferent. And if everything is beginning to feel the same to you, what's fading isn't the world. It's you. Sometimes you tell yourself it's a phase, that you're just tired, that it will pass, that you need to disconnect a little. But it's not just disconnection, it's abandonment. You start normalizing not being affected by anything, not being moved by anything, not feeling compelled to be more present. You become a version of yourself that floats, that survives, that fulfills, but that no longer really feels. You no longer get angry at what used to enrage you. You no longer celebrate as you once did. You no longer dream. You no longer break. But you also no longer build. And that has a price. Because at first it may seem that you're protecting yourself, that you're being stronger, more stable, cooler. But what you're really doing is turning yourself into a stranger to yourself. Because when you stop giving yourself importance, everything else begins to lose value too. Your habits, your decisions, your relationships, your dreams. Everything goes into silent mode, and from there, nothing true is built. When you no longer matter to yourself, when you stop respecting your own limits, your own emotions, your own desires, the thing you lose is not energy. It's identity. You begin living by inertia, choosing from apathy, being present without being there, speaking without speaking meaningfully, promising without intention of keeping. And each time you do that, something in you falls out of order. Because you know that this isn't how you wanted to live. You know that there was a time when you cared, a time when you fought to feel connected, a time when you had hunger, curiosity, momentum. But now, all of that seems distant. Not because you no longer have it, but because you've gotten used to living without it. And that is the truest loss. Not failure, not mistake, not deviation. The hardest loss is that disconnection from your own strength. The way you look at yourself in the mirror without really knowing when you stopped striving to be someone who inspired respect. Because that is what happens when everything feels the same to you. You begin to stop giving yourself the place you deserve. You no longer demand of yourself. You no longer care for yourself. You no longer choose yourself. But this is not about blame. It's not about demanding more of you. It's about looking at yourself with intention again. About stopping the lie that everything is fine when you know it isn't. Because if you were honest with yourself, you'd recognize that what hurts you most is not what you lost outside. It's what you're letting die inside. That part of you that's still waiting for you to come back. To come back with courage. To come back with decision. To come back and recommit to yourself. And for that, you do not need to have everything resolved. Nor do you need to have the answers. Nor do you need to feel full of energy. You just need to stop pretending that you don't care anymore. Because yes, you do care. It hurts you, and you do care. It weighs on you, and you do care. You don't know how to do it, but you still care. And that is the starting point. Not enthusiasm, not desire, the truth. And the truth is that deep down, you want to feel again. You want to reclaim momentum. You want to vibrate with something that isn't just distraction or escape. Because life doesn't stand on autopilot. It doesn't renew you. It doesn't give you back anything. It only lulls you. It pushes you to settle, to let opportunities slip by, to normalize relationships that don't nourish you, to justify habits you know are dimming you. And the longer you stay there, the harder it is to leave. Not because you can't, but because each day you repeat that indifference, you reinforce the idea that living this way is enough. And it isn't. It doesn't matter what you've lived. It doesn't matter how exhausted you are. It doesn't matter if you're going through a hard moment or coming from 1,000 failed attempts. None of that justifies abandoning yourself. None of that justifies becoming someone who no longer cares about their own path. Because if you don't care for it, no one else will. Your responsibility is not to be perfect. Your responsibility is not to disconnect from what makes you feel alive. And if everything is feeling the same to you, it's time to take a real pause. Not to escape, not to evade, but to ask yourself with the greatest honesty possible. When was the last time you acted with enthusiasm, with commitment, with purpose? When was the last time you looked at yourself and liked what you saw? Because if nothing matters to you, there is no drive. And without drive, life loses shape. It becomes a soulless repetition. And you are not here for that. You are here to build something that represents you. You are here to inhabit your life with presence, not to pretend that you're okay when inside you're exhausted from pretending you don't feel anything. It is time to come back, to choose yourself again. Not from enthusiasm, but from decision, from the need not to let indifference consume you. Because the coldness you're feeling is not strength, it's emptiness. And you can fill it, yes, but not with more noise, not with more distraction, only with actions that reconnect you, with words that represent you, with habits that return the sense of being on this path, even if it hurts, even if it costs, even if it's slow. Chapter 13. Your identity isn't fixed, it's a comfortable excuse. There is something you learned without realizing it. You repeated it so often that now it sounds like truth. This is just how I am. You say it as if it were a definition, an unmovable wall, a label tattooed on your way of being in the world. And perhaps at first you used it to explain yourself, to understand yourself, to mark certain limits. But over time, you began to use that phrase for something else, to avoid change. You clung to that idea like someone clings to a railing in the middle of an earthquake. Because changing is frightening. Because letting go of a part of yourself, even if it no longer serves you, generates vertigo. And so you stayed there, inside an identity that you repeat without questioning, as if it were carved in stone, as if you could not transform, as if what you were was the only thing you could ever be. And the truth is that identity is not real. It's a construction, a story you have told yourself so many times that you no longer even observe it. But you are not forced to remain inside that story. You are not sentenced to be the same person every year of your life. You are not a fixed structure. You are a version that can be questioned, adjusted, transcended. And if you don't do it, it's not because you cannot. It's because that idea of "this is just how I am" gives you comfort. It justifies you. It protects you. It protects you from external judgment. But above all, it protects you from your own internal judgment. Because if you are just like that, then there is nothing you can do. If you are an impatient person, then there's no need to work on your tolerance. If you are insecure, then there's no need to expose yourself. If you are someone who gives up easily, then you don't have to persist, because everything you do is justified by what you say you are. But that is not identity. That is a limit, one you have chosen to repeat, not because it truly represents you, but because it gives you an escape. Because when you say, "this is just how I am," you no longer have to do the work of becoming someone else. You no longer have to struggle with the discomfort of changing habits, revising beliefs, adjusting reactions. It's enough to say, "this is just who I am," and remain the same. And it's not that you have to deny who you were, but who you were does not define you if you decide to move. What you did, what you thought, what you suffered, what you stayed silent about, all of that is part of your path, but it is not your destination. It's your starting point. And clinging to that narrative prevents you from moving forward because it fixes you in a place from which every attempt becomes a battle against yourself. As if you had to betray yourself to grow, when in reality growth is not betrayal. It's liberation. Liberation from outdated versions, from inherited ideas, from phrases you repeat without really knowing where they came from decisions you made from need, fear, or pain, and that you now keep repeating out of habit. But the fact that they served you at some point doesn't mean they have to keep defining you now. You are so much more than your history. You are so much more than your character, your personality type, your repeated mistakes. All of that can change, and you know it, because in some moments you already changed. You were someone else once. You made decisions you wouldn't have made years earlier. You overcame things you thought impossible. But each time you return to, "this is who I am," it's as if you erased all you have grown at, as if you chose to stay in a mold that no longer fits, simply because it is the only one you know by heart. And there is no growth inside a fixed mold, because no mold can contain a life in motion. No label can hold everything you are, everything you feel, everything you could become if you stop telling yourself the same old story. And yes, it will feel frightening, because there is nothing more uncomfortable than looking at yourself and telling yourself, "This I am is no longer serving me." Because in that moment, there are no more excuses, no more scapegoats, no past to justify you. There is only you, facing the responsibility of constructing a new version of yourself with which you feel more at peace. But if you don't undertake that work, you will continue living bound to a character that has become predictable, one that perhaps helped you fit in, survive, feel safe, but that now feels tight, restrains you, hardens you, repeats itself. And if you want to move forward, you need to understand that your identity is not a sentence. It's a tool. And tools are adjusted according to what you need to build. You are not who you were 5 years ago, nor who you were 1 year ago, not even who you were yesterday, if you choose to move with honesty. Because every new action is an opportunity to sculpt yourself differently, to tell yourself with deeds, "This too I can be." Not because it's easy, but because you no longer wish to use the same comfortable excuse to stay where you are. Because that's what it is, an excuse. Very well crafted, very believable, even respected by others. But an excuse at the end of the day, one that spares you the discomfort of change, one that keeps you waiting for the world to adapt to your current version instead of doing the work that is yours, to evolve. And it's not an obligation, it's a privilege. The privilege of being able to choose yourself. The privilege of being able to create yourself. The privilege of no longer living imprisoned by an outdated idea of who you are. It doesn't matter if you learn to be shy, aggressive, distrustful, submissive, controlling, or avoidant. None of that defines you if you choose to face it directly and transform it. Not deny it. Transform it. Because no one becomes a new version of themselves by repeating the same things every day. Identity is renewed through decisions, through small betrayals of the character you have been sustaining, through the bravery to do something you have never done, to say something you have never said, to let go of something once deemed non-negotiable. That is where your true freedom begins. Not when everyone understands you, not when everything fits, but when you finally stop defending the idea of who you are and begin becoming who you want to be. Chapter 14. You're waiting to feel ready. You never will. You have made lists. You have read books. You have filled notebooks with plans, ideas, strategies. You have talked about change. You have visualized it. You have even imagined it in vivid detail. And yet you do not take action. You do not do it. You do not move forward. Because you are waiting for that moment. That exact point when everything feels clear. When there are no doubts. When your body aligns with your mind and fear dissolves. You are waiting to feel ready, as if that day will arrive naturally, without you having to force it, without pain, without being shaken. But it won't come, and the sooner you accept it, the better. Because that feeling you're waiting for is not preparation, it's fantasy. The fantasy that one day you will wake up and everything will click. You will feel certainty, you will have energy. You will know what to do, how to do it, and why. And that day, you tell yourself, will be the beginning. But it doesn't work that way. The day you do it will be the day you dare, not the day you feel ready. Because no one ever feels completely prepared to do what they have never done. That idea that you have to feel secure first in order to act is a subtle trap. A trap that sounds rational, sounds prudent, even one that many repeat as advice. But in practice, it's just another way to postpone. Because what you are really afraid of is not failing. It is exposing yourself. It is stopping the protection of the image you have built. It is doing something real and realizing that it will not come out perfect. It is shifting from imagining to executing, even though you know it might go wrong, that you will make mistakes, that you will feel discomfort. And that is where true commitment is measured, not in preparation, but in willingness. In the ability to move forward while you still feel fear, while you still doubt, while your voice trembles and your legs shake too. Because growth does not start after fear. It starts inside it. And if you wait for it to pass before moving, you will be stuck much longer than you think. You are not paralyzed because you can't. You are paralyzed because you still believe that someday you will feel different. And the truth is that you will not. You will have to move while feeling uncomfortable. You will have to act with a tight throat. You will have to speak with a trembling voice. You will have to get up even without having all the energy. Because no one transforms from comfort. And if you're waiting for everything to align before you begin, you have already begun to lose. Preparation is important, yes, but there comes a point when it stops being preparation and becomes an excuse. When you already know enough. When you already understand the way forward. When the next step is clear, even though it hurts. What you lack is not information. What you lack is courage. And courage does not come when everything is calm. Courage appears when you realize that, even though you're not ready, you cannot stay where you are any longer. And you know it. You feel it in your body. That weariness you've been dragging around is not physical. It's emotional. It's the silent price of living on pause. It's the hidden cost of telling yourself every day that you'll start tomorrow, and that tomorrow never comes. Because it's not a matter of a date on the calendar. It's the decision. You don't need to wait to feel strong. You need to withstand your weakness while doing what needs to be done. You don't need to stop being afraid. You need to move with that fear. You don't need everything to be perfect. You need to begin in the state you're in, with what you have, with what you know, and understand that you will not be completely ready because no one ever is. And yet there are people who do it anyway. Do you know what they have in common? It's not that they're brave all the time. It's not that they know more than you. What they share is a moment of brutal honesty with themselves, in which they accept that if they wait any longer, they will end up burying what they could have built. And so they act. Even if they shake. Even if they're not convinced. Even if there is no guaranteed outcome. Because they understand that real preparation occurs along the way, not before you've set out. What exhausts you the most is not doing. It's thinking that you should be doing. It's spending your days feeling guilty for what you don't start, for what you postpone, for what you know you need to do yet keep avoiding. That constant friction wears you out more than any actual effort. Because your mind is active all the time, but your body doesn't move. Because your talk is about growth, but your decisions are about stagnation. Because you want to change, but you're not willing to endure the discomfort of transforming. And yes, there is a grieving process. There is deep discomfort in letting go of the version of yourself that has given you security until now. But that grieving is part of the process. If you wait to go through it without pain, you'll continue going in circles. Because changing means that part of you has to die. It means a part of you remains behind. It means you can no longer pretend you didn't know what you had to do. And that costs. But it also liberates. Because when you own it, when you take that step without guarantees, when you stop asking for permission and start answering to yourself, something changes. Not outside. Inside. A different kind of strength begins to form. It is not euphoria. It is not motivation. It is commitment. And when you find it, it is not easily broken. So stop waiting. No one will come and give you the security you are demanding to feel. No one is going to appear with the exact confirmation that now is the moment. Because that moment isn't something you find. It's something you choose. And if you're looking for signs, here is one. If you have already thought it through 1,000 times, if you've analyzed it from all angles, if you've talked about it, if you've felt it, then that's it. It's time to act. Even if you don't feel ready. Because maybe real preparation is that, moving forward without feeling ready. And discovering that precisely because of that, you are more ready than you thought. Chapter 15. Your environment doesn't define you, but it conditions you more than you think. You may have clarity about your objectives, intention in every step, and a somewhat consolidated discipline, but if you don't take care of the environment you're in, that environment will start working against you without your noticing. Not because it is bad in itself, nor because someone is wishing you harm. It's just that the environment doesn't have to actively sabotage you to hold you back. Sometimes it's enough that it doesn't push you, doesn't challenge you, keeps you comfortable. That comfort doesn't define you, but it does shape you. Without you seeing it, without you fully choosing it. The problem is, a part of you insists on believing that your internal strength is enough. That it doesn't matter who you're with, what you see every day, what kinds of conversations you have, what kind of energy surrounds you. You believe your willpower will compensate for any external circumstance. And although it sounds good, it's a naive idea. Because no one lives in isolation. And however conscious you are, something of the environment always seeps in. It infiltrates your habits, your emotions, your daily choices. And we're not just talking about toxic people. We're talking about environments that don't demand anything of you. Relationships that don't confront you. Empty conversations that repeat every day as background noise. Spaces that, instead of expanding you, dim you, slow you down, normalize you. Places where change isn't frowned upon but isn't promoted either. Where dreams are heard, but never challenged. Where mediocrity is not punished. It's simply shared. And when you live there, you don't notice it at first. Because everything seems calm, even comfortable. But over time, you begin to realize you're struggling to move forward. Not because you lack ability, not because you aren't working, but because what surrounds you doesn't push you, doesn't remind you of who you could be, doesn't question you when you get too comfortable. And so, even if you have big dreams, you move around in small scenarios. Even if you have powerful ideas, you discuss them with people who cannot hold them. Even if you want to grow, you do it surrounded by voices that fear seeing you advance more than they fear standing still themselves. And that conditions you. Because every time you lower your intensity to fit in, every time you hide your desires so as not to bother, every time you doubt your decisions because your environment doesn't understand them, you dim yourself. You don't do it all at once. You don't even notice. But it happens. It happens when you stop sharing what excites you. It happens when you look for support and only receive neutrality. It happens when you become the version the group can accept, not the version you know you could be. It's not about blaming others. It's about honestly acknowledging that the energy around you matters. And if you don't choose it consciously, it will choose for you. Because habits are contagious. Emotions are transmitted. Priorities are copied. And if you're surrounded by people who are okay where they are, who don't demand of themselves, who don't want to get uncomfortable, sooner or later, you will adapt to their pace to avoid being left out. And you realize it too late, when you look back and notice you didn't become what you imagined, that you settled, that you lowered your standards without noticing, that you began to take lightly things that once mattered, that you gave more weight to consensus than to your impulse. Because that also happens. Sometimes it's not that you don't know what to do. It's that you don't have someone to do it with. You don't have someone to talk about it with. You don't have someone to hold an honest conversation about what's holding you back. And that dries you up. Because a part of you needs to be surrounded by people who lift you up, who challenge you, who won't let you settle, who can see beyond what you're capable of seeing in yourself. And that doesn't mean cutting ties with everyone. It doesn't mean surrounding yourself only with clones of yourself. It means having the clarity that your environment cannot be made up of people who constantly minimize your desire to move forward. Not because they're bad people, but because their fear, their passivity, their comfort often disguises itself as concern for you. And if you don't have criteria, you end up believing it. That is why you need an emotional cleanup. Not an aggressive purge, not a drama, but an honest review of whom you share your energy with, whom you talk to when you're about to make an important decision, who celebrates your growth without feeling threatened, who encourages you to go further without asking you to apologize for it. And if you don't have that close by, you need to find it. Because without a healthy environment, without an ecosystem that pushes you, chances are that you'll end up adapting to something that looks nothing like the life you want to build. And that's not betraying your relationships. It's being loyal to your path. Because if you're in a stage of real transformation, you need to surround yourself with people who are also in motion, who understand the process, who don't look at you strangely when you say you want more, who don't interpret your evolution as a personal threat. Because your environment doesn't define you. That is true, but it conditions you more than you think. And if you don't take care of it, if you don't choose it with discernment, if you don't adjust it when necessary, you will end up asking your willpower to compensate for what your context does not support. And it won't be enough. Because not everything can be resolved from within. There are changes that only happen when what surrounds you changes too. So don't lie to yourself. Don't idealize your resistance. Don't overestimate your ability to advance in a space that isn't designed for it. And if you have to put some distance, do so. Not as a punishment, but as an act of protection. Because your energy is too valuable to waste on conversations that dim you, on relationships that drain you, on routines that pull you away from the person you could become if you surrounded yourself more wisely. Chapter 16. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice, and not just a self-help slogan. There are things you won't be able to avoid, losses that cannot be postponed, blows that come without warning, situations that arrive and settle without you having invited them. It doesn't matter how much you plan, how much you protect yourself, or how many books on resilience you devour. There are pains that will come anyway, because they are part of being alive, because no one makes it through life without wounds. And as harsh as it sounds, that's actually good news, because feeling pain means you care. It means you're involved. It means you're present. The problem begins when that pain stops being just a reaction and becomes a way of life. When instead of moving through it, you transform it into your identity. When it stops being a specific hurt and you start living from the pain. That's where suffering appears, and it's not the same thing. Pain is clean. It's direct. It arrives, it crosses you, and if you don't deny it, if you don't repress it, if you don't resist it, it transforms. Yes, it hurts, but it teaches. It makes you more lucid, more sensitive, more real. Suffering, by contrast, is something else. It's that state where you stay stirring what has already happened. It's an attachment to the wound, an emotional habit, an internal repetition that doesn't aim to heal, but to justify why you remain stuck. And no, calling suffering a choice is not an empty phrase. It is a choice that we often make without realizing it. We choose to stay in what was done to us, in what we didn't have, in what hurt us, in what didn't go as we hoped. We choose to tell that story over and over again, to others and worst of all to ourselves, as if repeating it granted us some kind of power. But it doesn't. It only reinforces the wound. It deepens it. It turns it into a refuge, because that also happens. There are people who feel safer in suffering than in the possibility of healing. Because to heal implies movement, and movement implies change. and change is scary. So inadvertently, they choose to stay where they know every corner of the pain, rather than venture into a new life they don't yet know how to inhabit. Suffering robs you of clarity. It makes you view everything through a dark filter. Nothing seems enough. No one seems to understand you. Everything is a threat. Everything is lack. Everything is injustice. And from that place, it's almost impossible to build something healthy. Because when you live from suffering, you interpret everything as a continuation of the original wound. And the world will keep confirming it, not because it's true, but because it's the only thing you're willing to see. You have to be brutally honest to accept that sometimes suffering becomes a comfort zone, a place where there is no demand for change, where everything has an explanation, where you can always return to being the victim. But living there has a price. It dries you out. It shrinks you. It makes you reactive, closed off, rigid. It severs you from life. It locks you into a version of yourself that is always waiting for something external to make you feel better. And you are not condemned to that. Because although you couldn't choose what hurt you, you can choose what you do with it now. You can decide to stop telling that story from the role you learned. You can choose what meaning you give to what you experienced. You can stop reacting from the wound and start responding from awareness. Not to deny what happened, but to stop allowing it to keep dictating who you are. This is not an invitation to minimize the pain. It's an invitation not to settle into it, not to use it as an excuse to avoid moving forward, not to make it the core of your identity. Because if every time something goes wrong you return to that suffering story, you will end up building an entire life around what happened to you. And you are more than that. You have always been more than that. But to get out of it, you have to do something uncomfortable. Stop justifying yourself. Stop repeating that you can't, that it's too hard, that you already tried. Because as long as you keep circling around the same argument, you won't move forward. Not because you can't, but because you refuse to let it go entirely. Because you believe that if you let go, you lose something. Maybe a narrative. Maybe a way to protect yourself. Maybe a part of you that feels that if you don't suffer, you don't matter. But you do matter. A great deal. Because when you choose to step out of suffering, you don't become less deep. You become freer, more present, more open to other possibilities. And that freedom isn't superficial. It's what allows you to feel again, without every emotion having to first pass through the filter of the past. You will continue to feel pain. That will not change. But it will hurt differently. It will hurt with purpose, with direction. It will be pain that pushes you, not pain that holds you back. And that kind of pain is worth it. So if you are there, if you feel like you have been spinning around the same pattern for far too long, if you notice that every conversation, every relationship, every thought returns to the same point, then maybe it is time to ask yourself not why what happened to you happened, but why you keep telling yourself the same story. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is not. And although that phrase may have grown worn from overuse, it remains true. What matters is from where you say it. If you use it to avoid feeling, it's a mask. But if you understand it as a door, it can change your life. Chapter 17. Success is not a place. It's an uncomfortable practice. For a long time you were led to believe that success is a goal, a point of arrival, a specific place you would reach after a certain sacrifice, with a clear reward, with a visible change that would validate all previous effort. And you believed it. Because it sounds logical, it sounds motivating, it sounds like a fair way to understand life. You work, you persevere, you achieve it. And once you arrive, you will feel fulfillment, relief, satisfaction. The problem is that that moment doesn't arrive as you expect. And the longer you push it into the future, the emptier everything you do now begins to feel. Because true success, the kind that genuinely changes your life from the inside, is not a place. It is not a one-time achievement. It is a practice. It is a way of being present, of acting, of responding to what is unseen, what is not applauded, what is not posted online. And like any practice, it lacks glamour. It does not always inspire. It does not always excite. Often, in fact, it bores, drains, discomforts you. Because it is full of silent repetitions, of small decisions, of routines that don't shine but build. The mistake is thinking that the hard part is getting there, as if once you cross a certain line, everything will change. It doesn't. The truly difficult part is sustaining. Sustaining discipline when no one demands it. Sustaining commitment when no one is watching. Sustaining yourself when your environment does not understand where you are going. Because that is where success is forged, in the uncomfortable, in what you cannot tolerate easily. And that is why many don't arrive. Not because they lack talent, not because they don't want to, but because they cannot stand that part of the process where nothing seems to work, where everything you do appears to fall into a void, where you face yourself every day and you don't always come out winning. That part is not told in speeches. It is not shown in documentaries. It is not posted on social media. Yet it is the part that defines you. Because success is not the result of a moment of inspiration. It is the accumulated effect of thousands of uncomfortable choices. It is the echo of every time you could have given up, and you didn't. Of every morning when you could have negotiated your commitment, but you upheld it anyway. Of every conversation that could have derailed you, yet you chose not to have it. That is success. You don't see it, but you feel it. And the problem is that many people keep searching for something that looks like success. Something they can show off. A recognition, a number, a validation. And when they don't find it quickly, they assume they are failing, that they are not ready, that they don't have what it takes. But that's not it. It's simply that they're still in the part of the process where success feels more like sacrifice than reward. And if you are not willing to go through there, you will never arrive at any place worth sustaining. Because the superficial is easy to obtain. What is complicated is building something with roots. Something that supports you when things don't go as you expected. Something that doesn't depend on context, or mood, or external validation. And that must be trained. It does not appear by itself. It doesn't come from reading pretty phrases or waiting for the right moment. It is trained through practice, through habits, through choices, and above all, through an uncomfortable relationship with yourself, in which you don't allow yourself everything, in which you don't justify everything, in which you don't keep postponing everything until tomorrow. Success doesn't transform you into someone else. It only amplifies what you were already doing when no one was watching. If you have been lying to yourself, success will only multiply that disconnection. If you have been keeping your word, it will strengthen it. Because success doesn't create anything new. It only exposes it. And if you don't understand it that way, you will reach certain achievements feeling you're not up to it. That everything is more fragile than it seems. That you're missing something to enjoy it. And it's not that you are missing something. It's that you haven't built enough within you to sustain what you have achieved outside. So stop imagining success as a destination. Start living it as a practice, as a way of making uncomfortable choices every day, as a way of choosing yourself even when you have no guarantees, as a way of committing, even on days when you have no desire. You don't need to do it perfectly. You don't need to feel inspired all the time. What you need is to accept that if you're not willing to endure the uncomfortable part, you are not ready to sustain the result. Not because you don't deserve it, but because results without practice collapse on their own. They don't last. They don't integrate. They don't change anything deep inside. True success is silent at first. No one applauds it. No one notices it. Only you know what it costs. Only you know what you are leaving behind. Only you know all that you sustain when it would be easier to let go. And precisely for that reason, it is valuable, not because it is brilliant, but because it is coherent. So don't wait for success to give you something. Start giving it to yourself, in how you work, in how you speak, in how you react, in how you keep your word even when no one's watching. Because that is what truly forms you. That is what will build something that doesn't crumble when you go farther. Don't focus so much on arriving. Focus on practicing every day, even if you don't see immediate results, even if you feel no gratification, even if it's hard. Because the only difference between those who move forward and those who don't is not talent or luck or connections. It's the discomfort they are willing to endure. Chapter 18. Your past story is not a sentence. It's material. Every time you speak about what you lived through, you do it as if it were a mark that can never be moved. A kind of sentence that wiped out your options. You speak from the burden, from the weight, from that place where one feels there's nothing left to do but endure. As if everything you are right now were irreversibly molded by what you experienced. But history doesn't work that way. The past can hurt, it can condition you, it can linger inside you longer than you'd like. But it is not a sentence. It is material. And by definition, material is meant to be used, to be worked on, rethought, shaped, transformed. It's not about denying it, or dressing it up, or exaggerating its impact. It's about understanding that your personal history is exactly that, personal. And if it still hurts you as if it were present, it's probably because you're not looking at it head on. You're repeating it. You're carrying it as an excuse dressed up as a wound. What you lived didn't get erased, but it can be resignified. It's not forgetting, it's evolving. It's not taking away its importance, it's giving it a new place. Because however difficult your childhood was, however many betrayals you endured, however many times you failed or were failed, none of that has to keep determining your limits. It can explain where you came from, but it doesn't determine how far you can go, unless you choose that it does. Because yes, it's important to say, many times, one chooses to keep looking at their history from a place of guilt, of shame, of anger. Because it's easier to keep being the one who suffered, the one who was hurt, the one who had no luck, than to be the one who takes responsibility, the one who takes that material and turns it into a foundation for building something different. Not because it's fair, not because it's simple, but because at this point, it's the only thing that really depends on you. There are people who spend their lives repeating what happened to them. They justify their reactions with what they lived through, their choices with what they didn't have, their limits with what they learned automatically. And by doing so, they chain themselves. They tell themselves, I am this way because of the past. But what's true is that at some point they decided not to question it anymore. They handed the keys of their future over to the past. And that's what you must break. Not your story, your way of reading it. Because the same story can become either ruin or cornerstone, depending on how you face it. You can look at what hurt you as a reason never to trust again, or as the exact lesson that allowed you to recognize clearly what you are no longer willing to tolerate. You can look at your mistakes as proof that you aren't capable, or as evidence that you dared to act, to try, to live. You can see your losses as voids, or as moments that revealed what truly mattered to you. None of that happens automatically. You have to do the internal work. You have to go through the grief. You have to break a little to rebuild yourself better. But it can be done. And not only can it be done, it's necessary. Because if you don't do something useful with what happened, it will keep hurting you longer than it deserves. It will trap you. It will make you react with fear where you could be deciding with awareness. And that even if you don't notice right away, is a slow way of disappearing. Unresolved stories seep into everything, into your relationships, the way you talk to yourself, how you face challenges. They disguise themselves as insecurity, anxiety, perfectionism, chronic mistrust. And if you don't give them genuine attention, they will occupy every space without you realizing it. Not because you lack strength, but because you haven't yet accepted that your story no longer defines you. It only prepares you. And that shift in perspective is everything. Because it returns the power to you. It removes you from the role of spectator. It places you again as the protagonist. Not to erase what happened, but to decide how you will use it. Because if you are capable of looking back and recognizing what that brought you, you are also capable of looking forward and deciding what you want to do with it now. Do you want to use it to protect yourself? Fine, but know that protection often also means isolation. Do you want to use it to justify your fears? You can, but then don't complain when you find it harder and harder to move forward. Or do you want to use it as fuel? Perfect. But then you must stop repeating that you can't, that you don't know how, that you can't make it happen, because that narrative no longer serves you. At this stage of your life, continuing to blame the past is a sophisticated way of avoiding the present. But there is nothing sophisticated about remaining stuck. Nothing noble about continuing to be a victim of a story that already happened. What is truly noble is recognizing that although you didn't choose what happened, you can choose what you do with it. And that is the point. Because each part of your story, the good parts, the horrible parts, the gray parts, the ones you avoid remembering, is material. And material, when ignored, accumulates. But when you work it, it transforms. And there is no better foundation for your future than a story you have been able to hold, confront, and use. Not to hide behind, not to impress anyone, but to build yourself with purpose. Because if there is one thing that gives real strength, it isn't having lived a perfect life. It's having been able to turn your broken parts into solid ground. And no one can take that from you. Chapter 19. Time is not the problem. The lie is what consumes you. You say you don't have time, that the days are too short, that work absorbs you, that you're tired, that life moves too fast. And that may be true. We're all dealing with an oversaturated world where it feels like every minute already has an owner before you even live it. But time isn't what drains you most. It's everything you're avoiding. Everything you uphold from an internal lie that, though not visible from the outside, eats you up from within. Because there's nothing more exhausting than living out of alignment with what you know. Not with what you show, not with what you say, not with what you pretend, but with what you know. With that thing you don't say out loud, but that accompanies you all day. That subtle discomfort that appears when you act against your own truth, when you do as if nothing were wrong, when you pretend everything is fine while inside, you know it isn't. And we're not talking about a grand lie. We're talking about those small dishonesty moments that pile up. That relationship that no longer serves you, but you keep holding on to. That job that no longer represents you, but you justify with the paycheck. That routine that numbs you, but you defend as stability. That "I'm fine" you repeat each time someone asks, even though you're broken inside. That effort to fit in where you don't want to be. That is what drains you. That is what robs you of time. Not the clock, not the obligations. The lie. The constant act of pretending a life that no longer reflects you. Because living in a lie, even if it's an elegant, acceptable, even functional lie, slowly disconnects you. It turns you into someone who complies, who answers, who does what is expected, but who dims a bit more each day. And you don't notice at first, because you keep performing, you keep producing, you keep doing what is expected of you. But inside, something is wearing away. You lose enthusiasm. Your presence grows cold. Meaning dissipates. And then comes the guilt. Because you feel you shouldn't be like that. That you have everything to be fine. That you lack nothing. That logically you should be grateful. But it's not about logic. It's about coherence. And when coherence breaks, your body knows it. Your body registers it before your mind does. It appears in the form of chronic fatigue, apathy, irritability. But it's not physical exhaustion. It's the price you pay for living halfway. It's the symptom of a profound disconnection between what you do and what you need. The problem isn't that you don't have time. The problem is everything you do to avoid facing your own truth. Because you know what you would need to change, but you don't dare. Because you know what you would need to let go, but you don't permit yourself. Because you know who you are not anymore, but you continue acting as if you were. And meanwhile you say you're busy. That life doesn't give you enough, that you'll fix it later, that now is not the moment. And that postponement makes you sick. Because everything you avoid mentally ends up emerging somewhere. It gets expressed in your relationships, in your mood, in your health. What you don't express, you somaticize. What you don't resolve, you repeat. What you don't face, you transform into a weight. And as much as you keep filling your agenda, marking objectives, organizing your week, if there is no truth in what you do, none of it will bring you peace. Because it's not productivity that heals you. It's honesty. And that honesty doesn't always serve you. Sometimes it's unsettling. Sometimes it ruins the image you worked hard to build. Sometimes it leaves you alone for a while. But at the same time, it restores presence. It restores connection. It gives you something so simple and so valuable. The ability to sleep with a clear conscience. The ability to look at yourself without having to justify anything. The ability to choose from a place that isn't tainted. And yes, it will hurt. Because there are entire structures that rest upon your lie. There are people who won't understand. There are choices that will hurt more than staying. But what's at stake isn't just your well-being. It's your integrity. It's your relationship with yourself. And when that relationship breaks, nothing external compensates. Being busy is not the same as being aligned. Having a full calendar is not the same as having a life that makes sense. Doing 1,000 things a day does not make you someone who lives intensely. Sometimes you're simply running so you don't have to feel. So you don't face that void that grows every time you move away from what truly matters. And do you know the cruelest irony? That if you dared to tell yourself the truth, if you dared to make that uncomfortable adjustment, if you stopped hiding behind the excuse of time, you would regain energy. You would regain clarity. Because there's nothing lighter than coherence. Nothing propels you forward with more force than knowing that what you do is aligned with who you truly are today. Not who you were yesterday, nor who others expect you to be. So if you are tired, if you feel as though everything requires twice the effort, if you live waiting for weekends to escape, if every decision weighs heavier than it should, don't look at the clock. Look at yourself. Ask in which part you stopped being true to yourself. At what moment you began to accept a life that looks good from the outside, but doesn't fit you inside. At what point you lied so convincingly to yourself that now the only way to keep going is to fill yourself with distractions. And once you see it, you will have to choose. Continue adjusting your life so it fits your lie, or start dismantling it with the risk that, at last, it becomes true. Chapter 20. It's no longer about learning more. It's about bearing the truth. You arrive at a point where reading more inspirational quotes doesn't work anymore. Storing more personal development videos in your playlists doesn't help. Highlighting books you know you won't actually apply is pointless. Because the problem isn't that you don't know what to do. You know. You have known for a long time. You have read enough. You have listened enough. It's been said to you in 1,000 different ways. You don't lack information. You lack decision. You lack the ability to stand firm in front of the truth without sedation. Because truth, your truth, doesn't need more theory. It needs courage. And that courage is not being loud, not fighting, not convincing anyone. It is standing still when the easiest option is to run away. It is looking at yourself without embellishments. It is ceasing to seek explanations for everything you avoid. It is finally accepting that you are where you are not due to lack of knowledge, but due to lack of honest action. And that is uncomfortable, because it is simpler to keep looking for answers outside. To believe that what you lack is in the next course, in the next talk, in the next book. But it is not out there. It is in what you already know and are not yet executing, in what you already understand and have not yet assumed. In that truth you fear to look at head on, because if you do, you won't be able to carry on the same way. There are no recipes here, no magical steps. All that remains is facing it. Because if you do not stand your ground in front of the truth, life will keep putting it in your face, again and again, until you have no more room to hide. It will show it to you in empty relationships, in choices that don't represent you, in days that repeat themselves without meaning, in the dissatisfaction you cannot explain yet cannot shake. You don't need someone to come and explain to you what's happening. You already know. What you need is the courage to act on that knowledge, to sit with yourself without distractions, without excuses, without stories, to stop disguising your paralysis as patience, to stop calling postponement a process, to accept that the only real block is the gap between what you know and what you dare to do with it. This isn't about moving forward quickly. It's about moving forward with truth. Because when there is truth, every step, even a slow one, builds something solid. Something of your own. Something that neither needs validation, nor permission, nor applause. And when there is no truth, you can move all you want. But none of it will satisfy you. Everything will be noise. Everything will be distraction. Therefore, before you go looking for more tools, ask yourself one question. Am I really willing to live according to what I already know? Not to talk about it, not to appear coherent, not to pretend commitment. Am I willing to adjust whatever needs adjusting, to lose whatever needs losing, to sustain whatever comes if I begin living from my truth? If the answer is no, then you will continue spinning in place. You will read more, take notes, get excited for a moment, but nothing will change at its core. Because without truth, everything else erodes, even what could have saved you. And if the answer is yes, it will hurt. There will be resistance. You will feel fear. But something will also happen that is priceless. You will regain respect for yourself. Because nothing feels as powerful as knowing you are acting from an authentic place. Even if no one understands. Even if it hurts. Even if you tremble all over. This is not the moment to keep gathering information. It is the moment to bear the truth you already know. Without drama, without victimizing yourself, without speeches, with maturity, with presence, with intention. Because everything that comes after that, everything you build from there, will have a different strength. Not because it is perfect, but because it is real. This audiobook ends here, but what truly matters begins now. Don't close it as if checking off a task. Close it as if making a commitment to a more honest version of yourself. I'm not asking you to understand everything, nor to apply it perfectly. Just don't look at your life with the same eyes you had before. You've seen too much. Now it's your turn. Do something with what you've heard. Something real. Something of your own. Even if it's uncomfortable. Even if it's not ideal. Because if you wait until you're ready, you'll never start. But if you start, even if everything shakes, you have already crossed to the other side. I'll see you in real life. The life that isn't narrated. The life that is sustained.